And history teaches us that as the US hegemony declines, the US imperialist offensive grows. We know that. The expression of this are their effort to expand NATO, their strengthening of sanctions, their desire to continue to push retrograde policies internally in the US and also abroad. The ruling class and its two-party system continues to lie to justify a military budget of, guess what, $900 million. They continue to lie to continue to justify 800 military bases all over the world. They continue to lie and tell not only the US population, but the rest of the world that is in our best interest to have killing mechanisms like NATO, like AFRICOM, like the Southern Command, and we know that they're lying. The good news is that many, many, many nations in the global south have woken up to those lies. And they have created mechanisms and structures to counteract what the US imperial force has been, not only in our region, but globally. The Bolivarian Revolution and the Cuban Revolution, two socialist projects, because that is also a model that we need to uplift. Two socialist projects have been at the head of the creation of organisms like CELAC, like ALBA TCP, that are models that oppose US imperialist force in this continent and provide a model internationally. And so today this panel will speak to these two opposing forces. Two opposing forces, again, that are very decisive, not only to nation states, but to people of good consciousness. Do we stand behind death and mechanisms of war and militarization, or do we stand behind mechanisms of life and projects that are there to make sure that there are democratic negotiations amongst nation states, that there is collaboration, and that there is a policy that is invested and has at the very core the needs and interests of the working class people of the world. That is what this panel is about. So I would like to invite you all to give a great round of applause to our panelists. And now I'm gonna read because I don't wanna mess up the introductions. So our first speaker is Francesca Emanuel. She is a Peruvian analyst and researcher and regular contributor to the online newspapers Huayca and Noticias Ser. She is currently pursuing a PhD in public anthropology at American University. Give it up. Focusing on international organizations, in particular, the Organization of American States. Francesca is also a senior research fellow at CEPR. Previously, she was the director of publications for the sexual and reproductive rights nonprofit Promex in Peru, and is a columnist for Peruvian dailies Diario 16 and Exitoso. Let's welcome Francesca.
Good afternoon to everyone. It is an honor to be here today with these great speakers and moderators. Thank you very much. Let me tell you about the most dominant regional diplomatic organization in the Western Hemisphere, the Organization of American States, the OAS. Today, almost all countries in the Americas have a permanent representative in this organization, except for Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. These three are the precise nations in the region subjected to unilateral sanctions by the United States. And the connection appears less coincidental when you learn that while the OAS comprises 34 member states, the US provides around 50% of the organization's annual budget. When factoring in additional donations this contribution increases to 60%. For those unfamiliar with the OAS, its headquarters is here in Washington, D.C., right across from the White House. It is a beautiful building that has a statue of Queen Isabella I at the entrance, which was donated to the OAS in the 60s by the Spanish dictatorship of Francisco Franco. As you know, Queen Isabella was instrumental in funding Columbus' expedition to the Americas, leading to the invasion and colonization of the region, which resulted in the worst genocide in human history. Despite this, Isabella's image welcomes visitors to the OAS. Some might argue that at the very least, this symbolism demonstrates the OAS transparency regarding its core values. Well, if there is an international organization still in existence that was founded reflecting the spirit of the Monroe Doctrine, it is the OAS. The OAS is an initiative that originated in the United States, tracing back to the late 19th century when US Secretary of State James Blaine co-opted Simón Bolívar's honorable idea of a League of Hispanic American Republics for regional solidarity and collective security to safeguard the sovereignty of the newly independent countries. Blaine's goal, however, was to solidify US control in the hemisphere by establishing an organization to facilitate commercial advantage for the US. In 1890, Blaine convened 17 Latin American countries in Washington, D.C., right here, and celebrated the first International Pan-American Conference, which resulted in the creation of the Commercial Bureau of the American Republics, initially housed in the State Department before moving to the current OAS headquarters in 1910. Blaine understood that US investors could expedite the process of capital expansion under a legal framework established at the state level and controlled by the US. So in other words, for my Marxist friends here, the direct forerunner of the OAS played a crucial role in sparking the process that shaped a trend of capital accumulation in the North and economic poverty in the center and south of the hemisphere. But of course, this discussion is for another panel or another conference. So later, the Commercial Bureau changed its name to the Pan-American Union. The US kept leading Pan-American conferences and also invading countries in the Americas during that period, and with a more careful approach in the 30s under the good neighbor policy. At the onset of the Cold War, the US pushed for a mutual defense agreement to consolidate influence in the region and counter the spread of communism, particularly from the Soviet Union. This agreement, known as the Rio Treaty, stipulated that if any foreign power attacked the countries in the Americas that had signed it, they would unite and collectively resist the aggression, of course, militarily. The OAS, and this is important, was founded 1 year later, in 1948, primarily as a decision-making forum for implementing this treaty, for implementing the Rio Treaty. Naturally, to maintain a permanent diplomatic forum, it was necessary to enhance it with additional mandates, such as fostering economic development, promoting democracy, peace, justice, and so on. As a critical aspect of the founding of the OAS was the US acceptance, at least in writing, of the principles of sovereignty and non-intervention in the internal affairs of other member countries. This acknowledgement was considered a significant victory for Latin American nations that had been urging the US to embrace these principles since the early 20th century. However, as long as the OAS pursues goals of US superiority, achieving these principles will be challenging. The OAS was not merely a US initiative, but has consistently adapted to the US needs to strengthen its dominance in the region. Initially, it functioned as a platform to facilitate favorable business contracts for the US and draw investors to its member countries. Later, it transformed into a regional front to confront communism, while under the banner of ideals of self-determination and sovereignty. But soon, it became evident that these principles were dispensable. The case of Cuba is a primary example. The OAS remained silent during the US-sponsored Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba, which was an attempt to overthrow the Cuban government. Shortly after, the OAS expelled Cuba from the organization after Fidel Castro declared the country's alliance to Marxist-Leninist principles. This revealed that the non-interventionist commitment in the OAS Charter had ideological limitations. In essence, the OAS implied that hemispheric integration was contingent on supporting capitalism, especially capitalism favorable to the United States. The OAS helped in isolating Cuba. It voted to impose sanctions and further assisted the US by providing the legal basis through the Rio Treaty to impose a blockade on Cuba during the missile crisis. Meanwhile, the OAS was silent towards long-standing, openly oppressive regimes allied with the US, including the Somoza regime in Nicaragua, Stroessner in Paraguay, and Duvalier in Haiti. But not only are the OAS principles selectively implemented or respected, the organization itself also exhibits a broad and changeable nature, making it challenging to understand it and anticipate its moves. Its regulations are vague, and the Secretary General, who heads the organization, has almost unquestionable authority, even over member states. This gives the Secretary General significant power to dominate the most debated issues in the forum. Additionally, the OAS has been an incubator of all kinds of ideas and initiatives, primarily conforming to the key objectives of its main contributor, the US. For instance, the OAS served as the platform for introducing the Alliance for Progress in the 60s, an interventionist initiative designed to counteract the proliferation of communism in the region, and that ultimately contributed to the rise of dictatorships and the perpetuation of economic dependency in Latin America. Moreover, the concept of the Inter-American Development Bank was first conceived during an OAS meeting. And to fully grasp the intricacies of the OAS, it is important to understand its significant and somewhat disorganized growth over time. The OAS has established numerous bodies over the years, such as the Summit of the Americas, which in its inaugural meeting in the 90s or mid-90s, 1994, aimed to promote a free trade area of the Americas that would consolidate the Washington Consensus. This could have had disastrous consequences. On the other hand, the OAS also has bodies more favorable to public opinion, like the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Both entities are well regarded in our countries for their role in reporting human rights violations. This intricate network of interrelated bodies within the OAS, occasionally marked by contradictions, contributes to the organization's resilience, making it difficult to contest. Furthermore, this complexity has allowed the OAS to endure despite involvement in serious offenses against the sovereignty of multiple countries in the region. Taking this complexity into account, I would like to discuss the more recent OAS, our OAS right now, and please note that I will only address a fraction of its latest interventionist action, which are, of course, always aligned with US foreign policy. During the 1990s, the OAS continued its tradition of evolving along the US foreign policy paradigm. This shift led the OAS to prioritize the promotion of democracy. As a result, the organization established the Department of Electoral Cooperation and Observation, which has since carried out more than 200 electoral observation missions throughout the region. Today, the OAS has positioned itself as the leading authority on electoral integrity in the Americas. When countries in Latin America and the Caribbean hold elections, it is widely expected that they invite the OAS to observe in order to establish the legitimacy of the electoral process. This significant influence has provided the OAS with the capability to destabilize democracies without resorting to invasions, as the United States has done in the past within the region. In 2011, the OAS arbitrarily changed the results of the first round of Haiti's presidential elections. And in 2019, it played a direct role in unleashing a coup d'etat in Bolivia by falsely claiming that the presidential election results, which declared Evo Morales the winner, were fraudulent. In the aftermath, a far-right government took power in Bolivia and subsequently orchestrated 2 violent massacres targeting indigenous population. In both cases, Haiti and Bolivia, it was later discovered that the OAS misrepresented facts and undermined the democratic process. In my view, the role of the OAS in laying the foundation for the coup in Bolivia represents the most egregious crime by this organization in recent history. And it establishes a precedent that should not only place the entire region on alert, but also prompt a strong desire to reform within the organization. Now, I'm almost there. Now, as an anthropologist and considering the limited time at my disposal, I would like to zoom in and address the influential players within the OAS. Well, I'm convinced that the OAS suffers from a fundamental structural flaw tied to its inception. I also believe that we activist citizens, academics, can reduce damage if we identify where the power lies and push for accountability. And this power in the OAS is concentrated in the hands of the Secretary General, Luis Almagro. Throughout his 2 terms as Secretary General, Almagro has resurrected the Monroe Doctrine. Remember when Trump entertained the idea of invading Venezuela? Well, Almagro claims that he was the architect of US policy towards Venezuela. But Almagro has gone even further, turning the OAS into a hub for international right-wing Latin American politicians. His office serves as a central point for far-right figures in the region, and he uses the OAS apparatus to empower or rescue these individuals. Recently, he secured an OAS position for Ecuador's former president, Lenin Moreno, in Paraguay, allowing Moreno to evade anti-corruption investigations in his home country. Almagro also established a so-called pact of impunity with the former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who is now imprisoned in New York on drug trafficking charges. Almagro supported Hernandez's grip on power by sabotaging an OAS-sponsored commission investigating corruption in Honduras. Ultimately, Almagro has taken control of the entire organization by abusing various regulations and infiltrating all levels, even extending his influence to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which compromises its autonomy. And of course, Almagro played a crucial role in the coup d'etat in Bolivia, and even now, despite the abundance of evidence debunking the OAS falsehoods, Almagro continues to uphold the lie. It is worth noting that a group of Democratic Congress members recently sent a letter to US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, calling for an investigation into Almagro's wrongdoings and other related issues. The crimes, or these crimes, are still fresh. And therefore, it is imperative to hold Almagro and the OAS accountable if we want to build an independent and sovereign future for the region. These actions by the OAS must be investigated and brought out of the obscurity which the organization promotes. We must demand reparations. The people of Bolivia who experience a fascist dictatorship and the people of Honduras who endure a violent narco state deserve that the OAS make amends for the harm it caused. Addressing these issues is key to paving the way for comprehensive reform of the OAS. This may involve rethinking the organization's structure, functions, and goals, relocating its headquarters, and adjusting the contributions of the member countries. Without these changes, the OAS will continue to prioritize US interests and empower a Latin American political class that is content with maintaining the region as the US backyard. In parallel, it is essential to strengthening alternative regional cooperation initiatives, such as the UNASUR, which already has an established headquarters and reinforces the formation of a South American region, or la CELAC, promotes a vision of unity and cooperation among Latin American and Caribbean countries. It is more likely that Latin Americas can break free from US interference if we work together and present a united front against attempts to subjugate the region. It is time to reclaim Bolivar's dream of a united and independent region that works together for the benefit of all its people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Francesca. We're going to hear from Dr. Jemima Pierre. She is professor at UCLA, jointly appointed in the Department of African American Studies and the Department of Anthropology. She is also a research associate at the inaugural Center for the Study of Race, Gender, and Class at the University of Johannesburg. Her research and teaching interests are located in the overlaps between African studies and African diaspora studies and engage three broad areas: race and political economy, transnationalism and diaspora, and the cultural politics of knowledge production. A first-generation immigrant from Haiti, Dr. Pierre has also published extensively on the impacts of ongoing US imperialism in Haiti. She serves as a co-coordinator for the Haiti Americas team of Black Alliance for Peace. Let's welcome Dr. Jemima Pierre.
Thank you all.
You should,
Is it? Oh.
yeah, it's on. You just move it forward.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm excited to be part of this conversation and to be with you, and to be speaking on behalf of the Black Alliance for Peace. In December 2019, President Donald Trump signed into law H.R. 2116, the Global Fragility Act. While this act was developed by the neoconservative and ironically titled United States Institute for Peace, it was introduced to Congress by Democratic Representative Eliot Engel, then chair of the House Committees on Foreign Affairs, and co-sponsored by a bipartisan group of representatives. The Global Fragility Act represents a new set of strategies for deploying US soft power in a changing world. It focuses US foreign policy on the idea there are so-called fragile states, which are a threat to the US because of their, quote, instability, extremism, conflict, and extreme poverty, end quote. Things which would lead, according to this act, to significant migration, which the US wants to prevent. Therefore, the stated aim of the Global Fragility Act is to tackle the quote-unquote root causes of instability in fragile states. Hailed as landmark legislation and as a potential game changer in the world of US foreign policy, the act seems to be a resetting of that policy in ways that shift tactics while maintaining the objectives and strategies of US global domination. The act clearly articulates its main goal, to advance US national security and interests, and to manage rival powers, and that is specifically Russia and China. In this sense, the Global Fragility Act, especially for governments and societies in the Western Hemisphere, seems to be a revamping of the Monroe Doctrine. One of the stated objectives of the Global Fragility Act is for the US government to be proactive in preventing conflict and instability. Preventing conflict, promoting stability in countries prone to violence, the support of locally driven political institutions. This is the language that the act uses to hide the legislation's real intentions, to rebrand U.S. imperialism by using a wide range of actors and resources, including neo-colonial governments and their local and regional structures, to enact policies aimed at upholding U.S. global power. What is significant about this act is the way that it uses other nations to carry out its objectives, a point that I will come to later. In April 2022, the Biden-Harris administration affirmed its commitment to implementing the Global Fragilities Act by issuing documents outlining a 10-point plan that will allow the integration and sequencing of U.S. diplomatic, development, and military-related efforts. Funding was allocated in the 2023 budget. The management of the Global Fragilities Act formally brings together the U.S. Agency for International Development, its parent, the State Department, and the Department of Defense. There are 5 trial countries for the implementation of this act, and Haiti is the first. My comments today focus on one key point, that Haiti has been and continues to be the main laboratory for U.S. imperial machinations, both in the region and throughout the world. It is no surprise, therefore, that in the rearticulation of a new policy for maintaining global hegemony, the Global Fragilities Act, Haiti is the first target. Without understanding this point, without seeing Haiti as the site of the longest and most brutal neo-colonial experiment in the modern world, we cannot fully understand the workings of U.S. and Western hegemony. And if we cannot understand the full extent of U.S. hegemony, we cannot defeat it. Consistent in its hypocrisy, in its deliberation on the Global Fragilities Act, U.S. officials label Haiti as one of the most fragile states, even as the supposed fragility is caused by more than a century of U.S. interference and consistent push to deny Haitian sovereignty. It is therefore important to understand the long history and nature of U.S. imperialism through militarism in Haiti, a clear model of both the role of militarism and the intricate and diffuse enactments of militarism as imperialism. To begin with, we must recognize that Haitian sovereignty has been snuffed out, and that Haiti is under current foreign military and political control. Of course, we know the first military occupation occurred from 1915 to 1934. But Haiti lost its sovereignty this time, beginning February 2004. Its state has been dismantled and its government taken over by occupying foreign forces. The plans for this intervention and occupation were hatched in Ottawa, Canada in 2003. Dubbed the Ottawa Initiative in Haiti, the objective was to decide the future of Haiti's governance. The administration of Canadian Prime Minister Jean Chrétien and his Liberal Party government organized a 2-day conference at Meech Lake, attended by top officials from the US, the European Union, and the OAS. There were no representatives from Haiti. Canadian journalist Michael Vastal, who got wind of this secret meeting, reported that the discussion in Ottawa included, quote, the possibility of Aristide's departure, the need for a potential trusteeship over Haiti, end quote. By the end of February 2004, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, the popularly elected president of Haiti, was deposed, bundled onto a flight by US Marines, and flown to the Central African Republic. US President George W. Bush announced almost immediately that he was sending US forces to, quote, help stabilize the country, end quote. On the same night of Aristide's extradition, 200 US troops had already landed at the airport in Haiti. By the evening of the day of the coup, 2,000 US, French, and Canadian soldiers were already on the ground. In the meantime, at the behest of the members of the United Nations Security Council, US and France, the UN Security Council passed a unanimous resolution that authorized, quote, the immediate deployment of a multinational interim force for a period of 3 months to help secure and stabilize the capital, Port-au-Prince, and elsewhere in the country, end quote. UN Resolution 1529 was passed under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which authorized the deployment of UN military force to, quote, take all necessary measures to fulfill its mandate. Now, unlike a Chapter 6 resolution, which refers to peacekeeping missions where parties of conflict give their consent, a Chapter 7 resolution demands no such consent. Haiti is the only place in the world that was not embroiled in civil war, but that received a Chapter 7 deployment, where UN forces are allowed to use military force to, quote, pacify the population. Thus, it is important to note that the 2004 illegal coup d'etat was both enforced and cleaned up with the sanction of the UN. On June 1st, 2004, the UN officially took over from US forces and established the United Nations Stabilizing Mission in Haiti, or MINUSTA, the acronym for its French name, for the task of military occupation under the guise of establishing peace and security. A multi-billion-dollar operation, MINUSTA had, at any given time, between 6,000 and 12,000 troops and police stationed in Haiti, alongside thousands of bureaucrats, technical staff, and civilian personnel. And we all know, in a horrific parallel to the first occupation, MINUSTA soldiers committed numerous acts of violence against the Haitian people, including massacres and rapes. MINUSTA soldiers are responsible for bringing cholera into the country, a disease that officially killed 30,000 people and infected almost 1 million. But what's most solidified this occupation was the creation and operationalization of the core group. The core group, an international coalition of self-proclaimed and non-Black friends of Haiti, friends in quote, was established as part of the UN resolution that brought these foreign soldiers and technocrats into Haiti. Its stated goal was to oversee Haiti's governance through the coordination of various branches of the UN mission. While it is claimed that this occupation officially ended in 2017 with the formal drawdown of the MINUSTA mission, the UN has remained in Haiti through a new office with a new acronym, BINU, the United Nations Integrated Office in Haiti. BINU's mandate has been continuously renewed from 2017 to now by the UNSC, the United Nations Security Council. BINU has had an outsized public role in Haitian internal political affairs and is the mouthpiece of the core group. While the core group's membership has fluctuated since its initial formation, it currently has 9 members: Brazil, Canada, France, Germany, Spain, the US, the European Union, the Organization of American States, and the UN. Significantly, this group has never had a Haitian representative and often meets without Haitian representation. Neither neutral nor passive, the core group plays an active interventionist role in Haiti's everyday political affairs. The overwhelming power of the core group is blatant public, visible to all who want to see it. At a special session on Haiti at the UN Security Council just this week, it was the head of the BINU, the UN mission in Haiti, who took the lead in presenting Haiti as a basket case of unthinking and violent gangs. Thus, unelected and unaccountable by the Haitian people, the core group is the arbiter of neocolonial indirect rule in Haiti. US imperialism in Haiti is a hierarchical structure established through the power of the US as a superpower, which then outsources the colonial control of Haiti to others. Thus, for example, one of the reasons that this occupation of Haiti, which began in 2004, is not seen as such is that while it was initiated and largely funded by the US and the United Nations, Haiti's sovereignty has been extinguished by a multiracial, multinational coalition of Caribbean, Latin American, and African countries. This may be the most sinister and least talked about aspect of this occupation, but it's also the most effective. In a classified diplomatic cable from 2008, and thank you for WikiLeaks and Free Julian Assange, the US ambassador Janet Sanderson explained the significance of MINUSTA in the shifting US strategy for military intervention and occupation. Sanderson wrote, quote, "MINUSTA is a remarkable product and symbol of hemispheric cooperation in a country with little going for it. There is no feasible substitute for this UN presence. It is a financial and regional security bargain for the US government. We must work to preserve MINUSTA by continuing to partner with it at all levels in coordination with other major donors and MINUSTA contributor countries from the hemisphere. That partnering would also counter perceptions in Latin America, in Latin contributing countries, that Haitians see their presence in Haiti as unwarranted," end quote. Brazil, for example, was in charge of the military wing of the occupations in 2004. It spent more than $750 million on maintaining military control. For Brazil, the country in Latin America with the largest black population and leftist government at the time, Haiti was its imperial ground zero. But there was also buy-in from other marginalized governments from the Caribbean and Latin America. At one point, Minista's leadership included a representative from Trinidad and Tobago and an African-American attorney and diplomat. And this leadership was accompanied by a multinational military force made up of a number of South American, Caribbean, and African countries, including Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Jamaica, Grenada, Benin, Burkina Faso, Egypt, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, Rwanda, Senegal, Guinea, Cameroon, Niger, and Mali. How do you hide an occupation? You diversify it. US imperialism involves a gamut of activities from diplomatic influence to cultural warfare to military intervention. It depends on a wide range of institutions, of actors, and diverse set of strategies, including the US State Department, the CIA, the USAID, which effectively determines how the occupied states' funds are distributed. It includes, funds, it includes Western NGO projects, controlled opposition of youth groups, the use of the National Endowment for Democracy, and then US media and Western media, which often serves as mouthpieces for the ruling class, preparing the cultural ground for the outside world to accept whatever actions are planned for those under occupation. And here we have to acknowledge the deep racism in the representation and treatment of Haiti. It also includes local and Western-based churches and missionaries, and most importantly, neighboring neo-colonial governments. For Haiti, these governments are the Dominican Republic, and more recently, surprisingly, Mexico, who worked with the United States as a co-pen holder for Haiti at the UN Security Council last summer to advocate for foreign military intervention in the country. It is significant that the Global Fragilities Act lays out a plan to see if the US actions in Haiti over the past 20 years lays out a plan that, if we see the US actions in Haiti over the past 20 years, has already been implemented in Haiti. If we look around, the US has already used this practice in Haiti to extend a different kind of rule over the region. Militarization of the region, for example, has shifted. The US Southern Command, Southcom, is key example, incorporating the Caribbean and South and Central America. Southcom claims to be protecting human rights as long-term responsibility to the development of regional militaries controlled and facilitated by the US. I want to wrap up by pointing to the need to recognize Haiti's significant critical place as both a laboratory of US militarism and imperialism, but also as a site of not only laboratory of US militarism and imperialism, but also as a site of one of the longest struggles for both Black liberation and the anti-colonial independence in the Americas. It is for this reason we also understand why the US empire's interest in the expansion of its hegemony has resulted in the constant reactionary onslaught against the people of Haiti and decades of instability for the nation as a whole. The 2 centuries-long imperial counterinsurgency against Haiti has aimed to terminate the most ambitious revolutionary experiment in the modern world. It is no coincidence that the attacks on Haitian sovereignty through an arsenal of tactics has been consistent and consistently banal. We ignore these tactics. We ignore how these tactics will be used on the rest of the region to our peril. The Black Alliance for Peace team is coordinating with Collective Campaign to fight for a zone of peace. And this peace in the region must begin with Haiti.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Jemima. I just want to raise, if folks want to applaud when they actually are in, believe that what folks are saying up here is truth, you could feel free to do that. Because I saw so many shy moments. Like, do that. Energy, we need to also raise the energy in our movement, so do that. All right, so I want to introduce Dr. Jorge Zuniga. He earned his doctorate in philosophy at the Johann Wolfgang Goethe University, Frankfurt, Germany. He has published a series of articles and book chapters on the theory of action, ethics, critical theory, social philosophy, biopolitics, and governmentality in Foucault. He has delivered lectures at conferences in Mexico, the US, Germany, Greece, Costa Rica, Chile, South Korea, Argentina, and Peru. He is professor of practical philosophy in the Department of Philosophy and Letters at Autonomous University of Mexico. Welcome, Dr. Zuniga.
Thank you for the introduction and the presentation. I'm glad to be here with these great colleagues and with the moderator, as well as with this diverse audience, no? Who is with us. So my colleagues, they talk about this panel and the last panel. They gave us a lot of data, a lot of statistics, a lot of description of facts that are happening in Latin America. So I think they, as I saw you, as I could figure out, they did a good job. So in my case, I don't want to stress this data from economics or from political sciences. I would like to talk about more about how to construct alternatives, or in other words, how we can construct alternatives, because I think that that is one of the main points of this symposium. Because Monroe Doctrine belongs to the territorial coloniality, but in Latin America we have two challenges: the territorial coloniality, as well as was what we with Pablo González Casanova can identify as domestic coloniality. That is one of the most important challenges we have to assume in Latin America, because we lived the first independence, the first emancipation in the 19th century, but we have our countries, our people lived coloniality in intern coloniality, no? Because of the elites, criollas, because of the elites, the elite that took the power of our countries, of our people, and they didn't make justice our original people, our Afro-descendant communities, people from Latin America and from the Caribbean. So I think that if we want to undermine this kind of ideological weapons of death, like the Monroe Doctrine, at the same time, we have to undermine this domestic colonialism that we live in Latin America and in the Caribbean since we became independent by the first time, when we became national states. No? The modern national states in Latin America, they perceive the coloniality in their own countries. So it is not enough to criticize the territorial coloniality, as well as it was well placed by my colleagues with the OEA, for example, with the Monroe Doctrine. No, that's not enough. We have to fight in our countries in order to make justice to this, to the excluded from the first independence in Latin America. So why do we have to think about it, to think of this kind of situation? Because if we are in a kind of in new call of history. Due to the conditions, the U.S. government has to concede many policies they pushed in an imperialistic way. So this is the reason why, for example, in South America, from the global south, we are constructing or we push the alternatives to this neo-colonial, neoliberal order that we live since the last century, the last 30 years in the last century. So I thought, why in the global south we construct, we push the alternatives to this colonial or neo-colonial order? Because we have to live, because we want to live, because we can live with this order, political order of death. No? For that reason, I stated that Monroe Doctrine is an ideological weapon of death, because there are not only political, economical weapons, like the sanctions, for example, economical sanctions, like, for example, subordination, or these strategies that my colleague described well. No? The domination is ideological as well. And this idea that, and this tergiverse idea of America for Americans, that is something that is exhausted, and it is valid anymore. So this reminds me the statement on the other side that a few weeks ago, the President of Mexico, López Obrador, stated clearly to the U.S. government, nosotros ya no somos una colonia. We are not a colony anymore. So in this, that is what we need in Latin America. Any neoliberal governments that are supported by the U.S. governments. We need new political leaders who assume an ethical responsibility in relation to, regarded to our people, to our communities, and that can make justice as the well-known efforts by Lula da Silva or López Obrador have been made. So yeah, one point more, and this is not only we agree that this fight is political. We have to fight. We have to construct the alternative. No? In these two ways I underline in relation to the territorial coloniality and the domestic coloniality. But at the same time, and this is maybe a call for my colleagues in philosophy or sociologists and professors, researchers, we have to think about the theories that accompany. You have to think in theories that plays as company in this process of liberation towards a second emancipation in Latin America. Because here, and maybe it's because I have in mind some criticism from compañeros y compañeras that are really critical to ideas. But the problem is that ideas and new concepts help us to understand the social world and the social, the political world, the social world, the social sphere from other, with other lens. And we need that. We have new concepts, new ideas in order to understand our current world. And that is maybe, I see many journalists here in this room, but for example, this is the reason why, and at least I see that situation clearly in Mexico. That is the reason why progressive journalists don't understand, for example, progressive governments, no, from Latin America, because they are building something new. These governments, like Lula da Silva, like Andrés Manuel, López Obrador, and they are really complex figures, no? And this is the reason why progressive journalists, for example, I think in CNN, no, that they are in Mexico, they are progressive and they work for CNN, but they don't understand this kind of changes in Latin America. They don't understand this kind of political figures like López Obrador, like Lula, no? That is the reason why, for example, it's easy to describe these figures as caudillos, for example, as dictators, and this is other thing, no? So no, I put only the example. I display this example with journalists, but what I want to mean is that all the social sciences, all the humanities, and now I relate directly to the theories. We have to be in the level of the current social world, and we have to develop these new theories that are a company of these political processes, no? And we have here in this room as well important and relevant authors that have developed this kind of theories, like the decolonial theory. That is one theory that we need in order to achieve this second emancipation. There are other theories like philosophy of liberation, for example, critical Latin American critical theory, and many the dependence theory, the economical dependence theory, and we need these theories just a ground in order to construct new ideas, new concepts, and new conceptions of the complex social world that we live in Latin America. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zuniga, precisely for reminding us of the battle of ideas, which is very important. Battle of ideas and the battle for emotions. All right, so our last speaker is going to be Professor Maldonado Torres. He's a professor at the Department of Latino and Caribbean Studies and the Comparative Literature Program. He obtained a PhD in 2002 at Brown University, Religious Studies with a certificate for outstanding work in Africana Studies, distinction Phi Beta Kappa. He is also co-editor of Latinos in the World System, Decolonization Struggles in the 21st Century, U.S. Empire, and guest editor of 2 special issues entitled Thinking Through the Decolonial Turn, Post-Continental Interventions in Theory, Philosophy, and Critique. Welcome, Professor Maldonado.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure being here with you today. I am now teaching in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Connecticut, but I'm coming here mainly as the co-director of the Franz Fanon Foundation. And it's a special pleasure coming from the foundation and seeing this event that is being organized and then sponsored by a great number of grassroots organizations. And I think that already that speaks to the kind of solutions that we want to advance. It's also a pleasure to be at an event that on the one hand we're meeting today to share some ideas, different forms of analysis, but that it started with a policy day yesterday where an organizer had the pleasure of joining the morning section of the discussions and preparations and some of the initial visits to legislators. So I think that again presenting a kind of a combative paradigm for knowledge sharing and knowledge production that we definitely need more of. So my congratulations to the organizers for gathering us, for bringing us together, and for offering us this model of building together. Now, when I initially learned about the event, and I'm going to be somewhat brief, I'm going to outline a series of points that are the ones that I would like to leave on the table for you. Right? And one of them is when I first was invited to the event to think about borrowing the Monroe Doctrine, to see about a new policy, a potential developing a new policy or advocating for a new policy in the US, for a new Latin America and the Caribbean, one of my first thoughts was, how are we going to advance in advocating for a new policy towards Latin America and the Caribbean when we live in a country that is keeping still very old policies, colonial, racist policies towards its own indigenous people. And when still in the 21st century, we have to march and go to the street to shout, Black Lives Matter. And when also still in the 21st century, the US remains a colonial power that controls the oldest colony in the modern world, the unincorporated territory of Puerto Rico. So where to begin? What are the bases that we think that we can generate that change when already, look who we're talking about, see about the public policy in place. So how to advocate for a change of foreign policy was my question when these are the conditions, right? And then how to do so then, maybe to engage in advocating for foreign policy while also simultaneously advocating for dramatic public policy change, both simultaneously and in an interrelational form. How to do that? That's what's one set of ideas and questions that emerged. The other was that when I look at Latin America, as it has been commented, here, that Latin America is still largely anti-indigenous, anti-black region, and with the exception of Cuba and Venezuela, most of the territory probably, I mean, I'll go there and put it like that, and we can then modify it. But most of the territory is somewhat or greatly indifferent to the condition of Puerto Rico because it's being incorporated in the U.S. So Puerto Rico is neither the U.S. or Latin America. It's in this limbo zone. And again, with the exception of Cuba and Venezuela, which tend to always come out in bringing out the topic about the colonization of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico barely matters in the rest of the territory. So I was wondering whether, in addition to burying the Monroe Doctrine, we have to think about burying an old-fashioned 19th century idea of Latin America. Right? And therefore, if we have to build with indigenous movements and other movements that had advocated for different imaginaries and different conceptualizations of the region, like Abya Yala, Gran Comarca, and so on, that these are not simply slogans or kind of aesthetic or kind of literary provocations, but I think there are actually very important socio-political, cosmological, geographical, geopolitical implications of what that is. So what would it be to enter this debate, not thinking about a new Latin America, but about thinking of somehow going beyond Latin America itself, right? With that notion of the Latin America. And I think we can take our lead from places like the Caribbean, and Haiti will be in a leading role, taking us beyond these ideas, I think, too. Now, coming from, I am Puerto Rican, and this is the panel on militarism. So I could not obviate the fact that, particularly in this panel, that right now, 2023, this year, is the 20th anniversary of the expulsion of the Marines from the island of Vieques in Puerto Rico, in the archipelago of Puerto Rico, right? It was May 1st, so almost literally 20 years, right? And so I think that, Vieques is part of the story of the Monroe Doctrine. And the expulsion of the Marines 20 years ago is part of the story about how to bury it, right? And so the Marines occupied about 2/3 of the islands of Vieques, and they remained there for about 70 years. And there has been opposition to that presence for decades, but in 1999, there was the death of David Sanos Rodriguez during a military exercise, and that led to massive forms of coalition and protest that ultimately led to that expulsion. And from Vieques, or with regards to Vieques, I would like to highlight two things. And one was the power of those mobilizations and the strong forms of solidarity. Until then, until that moment, right, the mobilization in support of Vieques and against the presence of the Marines in the island of Vieques, they led to the most massive mobilizations known in Puerto Rico until that moment, and brought people from the different political parties, no matter the status they prefer for the island, the political status. Many of them were supporting that the Marines had to go. What used to be a slogan only for independentistas or those who advocated for independence then became a slogan for the entire nation. And so I think that there is something there very important, really very important about those junctures and conjunctures where those forms of solidarities take place and how do they take place. And so they remain there as forms of effective burying of something when we come together in that powerful way. More recently, we saw then another massive form of manifestation, even more massive, which was in 2019 in the Verano Combativo, the combative summer of 2019, that led to the outskirts, to the expulsion of the resignation of the governor, right, of the island. So again, I think that the island colony, the archipelago colony, is providing some fundamental examples and ideas and proposals about how to bury effectively some of these policies and ideas. Now, with Vieques, the other point that I want to highlight is the strong environmental, social, and economic impact of the military presence there. So Vieques is clearly an example that simple departures, retiradas, from colonial armed military power from territories that they had possessed for a long time are not enough to address the impact of their domination, right? So the impact of the Marines in Vieques cannot be solved without major reparations for Vieques. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has stood for some, a number of responses from the U.S. government to address the situation in the island. There is now also a sort of a bill that is being circulated by a very right-wing Puerto Rican politician who also is expected to run for governor soon. But the great irony of that proposal is that wrapped around the notion of rehabilitation, that these rehabilitations run short of the actual reparations needed in the island. And second, that how to address then reparations in Vieques without thinking about reparations for the entire archipelago of Puerto Rico for more than 100 years of colonialism. And so it's a tragedy and a catastrophe that among the options of political status in Puerto Rico, you don't find any of them that tell the people of Puerto Rico, well, you can decide for this status, but this status will require, and potentially all of them, massive forms of reparations to undo the damage that the US presence has done in the island. And I think that reparations will not have to be limited to the archipelago of Puerto Rico. They would have to extend to nearby islands and nearby territories as well. And something else to point out is that it doesn't suffice either with reparations for Vieques or even reparation for Puerto Rico, or how ironic would it be now for anyone to talk about rehabilitating Vieques, particularly when they're advocating for the presence and continued presence of the fiscal board in Puerto Rico, Promesa, that was created under Barack Obama, not Donald Trump. And that became a quite direct form of economic colonialism today. Now, the second point that I wanted to highlight is that this is also the year 2023 represents 125 years after 1898, when Puerto Rico then comes to be a territory of the United States. And so with 1898 then, there was, of course, a heavy military presence in Puerto Rico through the different military bases, not only in Vieques, but also in other parts of the island. And also, since then Puerto Ricans have been participated forcibly in many cases when there was the draft in the wars led by the US, Puerto Ricans in the Korean War, Puerto Ricans in the First and Second World Wars, Puerto Ricans in the war in Vietnam, and so on. So when we think about militarism and colonialism today, we need to look at these examples. And Puerto Rico, as some here in this group have well documented and pointed out, that Puerto Rico becomes a kind of zone for military recruitment today, right? So the island colony that, among other things, becomes a source for military power, even as it suffers from the presence of the military in the island. Now, I wanted then to think about, what are the sources in a place like Puerto Rico and going beyond Puerto Rico about how to overcome this militarism. I mean, how to explain the fact that many people in the island, colonized people, joined the military of the power that is dominating that very land, right? And you know that you have to prepare the ground for that. That doesn't happen automatically. You have to have a system of education that leads people to see this as completely normal, that they don't see the current status of the presence of the military as a problem. So you need a kind of heavy education system that is leading everyone to see themselves as the benefactors, as the recipients of the graces of US power, right? So the question is how then to intervene with another education, I think, is part of this, of our way of thinking about undermining militarism, undermining the desires that anyone can see in wanting to join the military, for example. What would that be to have an education that will lead to that kind of thinking? And I want to point out that the University of Puerto Rico actually has been traditionally a site of counter-colonial, anti-colonial, and counter-military stuff. And that it is not by chance then that the University of Puerto Rico has been kind of the target of these forms, heavy forms of impoverishment, of de-investing from the local commonwealth, quote-unquote commonwealth. So I think that whatever response we give to the problem of militarism in Puerto Rico, but also in other places, is connected with education, and is connected with a kind of education and alternatives to a military way of being and a military outlook in the world that are provided in schools and universities. Puerto Rico has actually, the University of Puerto Rico has been characterized for being particularly, again, counter-colonial and counter-military, but not necessarily countering anti-blackness. And that has been until very recently, when we have, right now, at the moment when the university is so impoverished, we have some of the strongest forms of efforts. With recently, una segunda cumbre Afro. There was a second summit dedicated to African people and African descendant peoples in Puerto Rico. And right now, there's been a resurgence. So I think that is connected to the possibility of then reimagining the University of Puerto Rico as a site of both counter-colonial, counter-military, but also counter-anti-blackness generally. And finally, I end with this: as much as the university can offer, it will not be able, I think, to offer this kind of education soon. The best examples of this kind of counter-colonial, counter-military, and counter anti-black racist forms of thinking appears on the ground in the education of groups like La Colectiva Feminista en Construcción, which offers workshops and that educates the entire people of Puerto Rico and beyond into what is a radical feminist, they call it radical feminist thought grounded on decolonial thought and black feminism. And by doing that, they are putting themselves in Puerto Rico, drawing from black feminism, US black feminism, and drawing from anti-colonial theories from Latin America and the Caribbean, and they, I think, are at the leading edge of this kind of education that hopefully we can see at the University of Puerto Rico and that hopefully we can see in the schools, and then that can animate this larger resistance against colonialism and militarism in the island. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists. Let's give them another round of applause. I think one important element to take from this panel is that part of burying 200 years of the Monroe Doctrine is also uncovering our truth as Latin American and Caribbean countries, as oppressed people generally, our histories of resistance, our mechanisms of survival, detached from capitalism and imperialism, understanding that capitalism and imperialism are antithetical to anything that has to do with solidarity, collaboration, democracy, and therefore we need to reimagine new ways of living, new ways of relating, and there are models that have been set out for us, models that have been suppressed, that have been attacked, that have been in a lot of ways attempted to be buried themselves, and they have resisted. They are still here. When Chavez passed, people thought that the Bolivarian Revolution was gonna die. The Bolivarian Revolution is still here. When we had the passing of Fidel Castro, was the same thing. These imperialists believe, they really do believe, that they can counteract the people's will. And they do not count with the fact that when the people, the force of the people, is behind a revolutionary process, they cannot defeat it. And so let's be fed by that energy. Thank you so much for everything you've shared. Que viva Puerto Rico libre y socialista, que viva Haití libre, que vivan todos los pueblos del mundo de Latinoamérica.
Dicen las compañeras, y que viva Perú también.
Que viva Perú también, soberano.
Lunch is ready. Let's try to be back here. Special guest first. Let's try to be back here by 2:20, please. We're going to get started with our next panel, hopefully on time. Special guest first. Lunch is ready. Thank you very much.
Yeah.